She didn't know I was already 3 steps ahead when she slid that folder across my kitchen table. That's the part that still makes me smile even now. Let me back up. I turned 62 last March. My daughter threw me a small party, just family, a few neighbors, the kind of gathering where someone brings a store-bought cake and everyone pretends they baked it. I sat at the head of the table watching the people I loved most in this world, and thought quietly that I was a lucky man. That thought lasted about 6 more weeks. Then my son-in-law handed me a document in that same kitchen, and I realized I had been reading the wrong room for a very long time. My name doesn't matter much to this story. What matters is that I spent 40 years doing something most people consider unglamorous. I drove trucks, long haul mostly. Sometimes I'd be gone 2 weeks at a stretch, rolling through Kansas at 2 in the morning with nothing but CB radio static and my own thoughts. My wife, God rest her, used to joke that I was more comfortable with an 18-wheeler than with people. She wasn't wrong. I'm a quiet man, always have been. I don't talk much at dinner parties. I don't brag. I don't explain myself unless someone directly asks. What I do is think, and save, and plan. I grew up outside Decatur, Illinois. My father worked at a grain elevator. We weren't poor exactly, but we were careful. Careful with food, careful with heat in winter, careful with words. Money was something you respected because it could disappear fast if you didn't. That lesson stuck. When I started driving trucks at 22, I banked every dollar I could and lived like I was still making grain elevator wages. By the time I was 30, I owned my first truck outright. By 40, I had 3 trucks and 2 guys working for them. By 50, I had quietly built a small fleet, a logistics contract with a regional grocery chain, and a handful of commercial properties in small Midwest towns, the kind of places where nobody pays much attention to who owns the building on the corner. I never talked about any of it, not at parties, not at church, not even to my daughter, not in detail. My daughter is smart, sharp, actually. Got a business degree from Indiana University, went into pharmaceutical sales, and did very well for herself. I was proud, still am, but she married a man, I'll call him my son-in-law, who I had reservations about from the start. Not because he was a bad person exactly. More because of the way he looked at things, at people. Like he was always doing a quiet calculation. He'd shake your hand and his eyes were somewhere else entirely. His name was Adrian. He was 41 when they married. Good-looking, well-dressed, the kind of man who has opinions about wine and voices them whether you asked or not. He had a decent enough job in commercial real estate. Not exceptional, but decent. He drove a car that was slightly too expensive for his income, wore a watch that was slightly too nice for his neighborhood. These things don't mean a person is dishonest. But they're worth noting. They'd been married 3 years when it started to come apart. My daughter came to me in February, cold February, the kind where the wind off Lake Michigan cuts straight through you, even in central Indiana. And she was upset in a way I hadn't seen since her mother passed. She sat at my kitchen table, same table as always, and she told me Adrian had been talking to a lawyer. Not a divorce lawyer, she said. An estate lawyer. He wanted to know, she told me in a tight, controlled voice, what exactly I had, what was in my name, what she stood to inherit. I set down my coffee mug. He asked you that? He asked me to ask you, she said. He wants to know if there's a will. He wants to know the specifics. I didn't say anything for a moment. I looked at my daughter, her mother's eyes, her grandmother's stubborn jaw, and I thought about how to handle this carefully. What do you think about that? I asked her. She looked out the window. I think it's strange. But he says it's practical. He says at your age it makes sense to have these conversations. At your age. I was 61 at the time. I run 5 miles 3 times a week. I do my own roof repairs. But sure, at my age, I told her I'd think about it. She went home. I sat in that kitchen for a long time after she left. Here's what I knew that she didn't, and that Adrian absolutely didn't. 2 years earlier, on the advice of my accountant, a quiet, precise woman named Cecile, who has been doing my books since the Clinton administration, I had transferred the bulk of my assets into an irrevocable trust. The properties, the business interests, the investment accounts. All of it restructured, documented, and legally settled. My daughter was the primary beneficiary, protected completely regardless of her marital status, meaning that if she and Adrian ever divorced, he couldn't touch any of it. Not a dollar. The trust was ironclad. Cecile had made sure of that. I'd done it for exactly this kind of reason, though I hadn't known Adrian specifically at the time. I'd done it because I'd watched other men my age get picked apart in second marriages, watched their kids get cut out of inheritances, by people who came in late and left fast. I'd done it because my wife made me promise before she died that our daughter would always be taken care of. I hadn't told my daughter the details because I didn't want her to feel like I didn't trust her husband. That was my mistake, maybe. I was trying to protect her feelings. What I should have been protecting was her information. Next few weeks were strange. Adrian came over for Sunday dinner twice, and both times he was in an unusually good mood, chatty. Asking about the properties, offhand, casual, like it was just conversation. You still got that strip of land near Terre Haute, Walt? Except my name isn't Walt, he just called me that sometimes as a joke that I never found particularly funny. I answered vaguely. Said things were fine. Smiled. He brought up estate planning both times. The second dinner, he mentioned a financial advisor he knew. Said the guy specialized in wealth transfer strategies for families. Handed me a business card across the mashed potatoes. I took the card, thanked him, set it on the counter. Threw it away after he left. I called Cecile the next morning. Someone is fishing, I told her. How much do they know? Nothing specific. But they're working on it. How do you want to handle it? That was the right question. Cecile always asks the right questions. I thought about it for 2 days. I thought about my daughter, who I believed was not part of whatever Adrian was doing, but who might get pulled into it. I thought about what it would mean to confront him directly. I thought about what it would mean not to. Then I did something that felt a little theatrical but turned out to be exactly right. I called my daughter and told her I'd been thinking about what Adrian said, and that maybe it was time to do a proper family meeting about the estate. Get everyone on the same page. Make it formal. She sounded relieved. Said Adrian would be glad to hear it. I bet he would. I set it up for a Saturday in April. Just the three of us, my kitchen, and my attorney, a man named Philip, who has handled my legal affairs for over 20 years and who has a gift for being both completely professional and absolutely unreadable. I asked Philip not to bring documents to the table. I asked him to simply be present, listen, and speak only if I specifically asked him to. Adrian arrived that Saturday wearing a sport coat. On a Saturday, in my kitchen. He'd brought a leather portfolio. I noticed it immediately and said nothing. We sat down. My daughter made coffee. Philip sat in the corner like a polite statue. I let Adrian start because he clearly had things prepared. He'd done research. He talked about probate, about the complications of assets held in sole proprietorship, about how much simpler things would be if certain properties were co-titled with family members now rather than later. He was smooth. He used the right words. He'd clearly been coached. I let him talk for a good 15 minutes. Then I looked at my daughter. Sweetheart, I said, I should have told you this a while ago, and I'm sorry I didn't. Everything, the properties, the business, the accounts, has been in an irrevocable trust for 2 years. Cecile set it up. Philip drafted it. I nodded toward my attorney in the corner. You're the sole beneficiary. It doesn't pass through probate. It's not subject to marital property claims. It can't be co-titled because I don't own it anymore. The trust does. The silence that followed was one of the most complete silences I have ever sat inside. My daughter blinked. You? What? It's already handled. Has been for 2 years. I just never went into the details, because I didn't want it to feel like I was planning for something bad. Adrian had gone very still. The leather portfolio was open on the table in front of him, and I could see from where I sat that it contained printed pages. Questions, probably. Talking points. Maybe numbers he'd estimated. He looked at me. Then he looked at Philip. Philip looked back at him with a perfectly neutral expression. The trust, Adrian said carefully, is irrevocable? Yes, Philip said. And the beneficiary designation is not subject to modification by any party other than the grantor, Philip said. Who is sitting across from you? Another silence. My daughter was looking at her husband. Not angrily, not yet, but watching him. The way you watch someone when a thing that was blurry is slowly coming into focus. I thought, Adrian said, recovering, this was a conversation about getting organized. It is, I said. And now we're organized. I picked up my coffee, drank it. He closed the portfolio. The drive home from that meeting, I imagine it was a quiet one. Things between my daughter and Adrian had been fragile before that Saturday. After it, they deteriorated faster than I expected. My daughter called me a week later, her voice different, careful. She said she'd found something on Adrian's laptop while he was in the shower. Not snooping. She'd borrowed it to print a recipe, she said, and something had already been open on the screen. It was an email to the financial advisor whose card he'd handed me across the mashed potatoes. The email discussed, in fairly specific terms, the advisor's assessment of my daughter's expected inheritance and timelines for positioning. There was a sentence about the father's age and health trajectory. There were references to another conversation they'd apparently had by phone. It was, she told me quietly, written like a business plan. I did not say I told you so. I am proud of that. I said, what do you need? She said she needed to talk to a lawyer, her own lawyer. Not Philip, not anyone connected to me, someone independent who was only on her side. I said that sounded like exactly the right instinct. She found her own attorney, a woman in Indianapolis who handles family law, and I stayed out of it from that point forward. That was important. My daughter needed to do this herself. She needed it to be hers. The divorce was filed 6 weeks later. Now, here is where I want to say something to anyone who might be listening and thinking this story is about money. It isn't, really. The trust, the legal structures, Philip, Cecile, none of that was about protecting dollars. It was about what my wife asked me to do. Take care of our girl. Make sure she's never left with nothing. Make sure that whatever she builds on solid ground, and that no one can reach under her feet and pull it out. Adrian's attorneys contacted Philip twice during the divorce proceedings, once to ask about the trust, once to ask whether any assets had been transferred after the couple's marriage specifically to avoid marital claims. Philip answered both questions the same way. The trust was established 2 years before either question became relevant, and all documentation was available for review. They didn't ask a third time. The divorce was finalized in November. My daughter got the house they'd bought together, her retirement accounts, and her car. Adrian got his car, his watch, and presumably a very uncomfortable conversation with his financial advisor. My daughter came over the weekend after it was done. We sat at the kitchen table, same table, always that table, and she was tired in the way that people are tired after a long, hard thing is finally finished, not broken, just emptied out and ready to refill. She asked me when I'd set up the trust. I told her. She was quiet for a moment. Did you do it because of him? I did it because of your mother, I said, and because I've seen enough of the world to know that you protect the things that matter before you need to protect them. Not after. She nodded slowly. Then she said, Dad, why didn't you tell me? That one landed. I sat with it. Because I thought if I told you, it would feel like I was saying I didn't trust your judgment. And you had just married someone you loved. I didn't want to be that father. And now I think I should have told you anyway. Not because of Adrian. Just because you had a right to know what I'd built and what I'd built it for. She reached across the table and put her hand over mine. Her mother used to do that exact same thing. We sat there for a while without talking. The furnace clicked on. Outside, the November wind was doing its thing against the windows. I thought about my wife, about the grain elevator in Decatur, about 40 years of driving in the dark and thinking and saving and trying to be the kind of man who has something left to give. Here's what I've learned, and I mean this in the plainest way I can say it. Quiet doesn't mean absent. Patient doesn't mean passive. And the most dangerous assumption a person can make is that a man who doesn't talk much doesn't notice things. I noticed everything. Adrian made one fundamental error, and it wasn't greed. Plenty of people are greedy and manage not to make it an error. His error was that he assumed the size of my truck was the size of my life. He saw a man who drove for a living, who fixed his own gutters, who didn't own a sport coat, and he made a calculation based on that image. He thought he was dealing with a man who had stumbled into a little money and didn't know how to protect it. He was dealing with a man who had spent 40 years thinking about exactly that. My daughter is doing better now. She got a promotion in January. She's dating someone new, a high school history teacher who coaches cross country and apparently makes a very good chili. I've met him twice. He looks her in the eyes when she talks. That's enough for me, for now. I still drive sometimes. Not for work anymore. I sold the fleet 3 years ago, kept the contracts earning passive income. But I have one truck, an old Pete I've had since 2004, and sometimes on a Saturday morning I'll take it out on the highway for a couple hours just to remember what it felt like. The road, the engine, the particular kind of quiet that isn't really quiet at all. I built what I built. I protected what I protected. And when the time came to be 3 steps ahead, I was. That's the whole story. That's all of it.